In the ancient Greek world, no city-state inspired more fear and fascination than Sparta, the land of warriors. Sparta wasn't built for art or philosophy, it was built for strength, survival, and absolute discipline. While Athens gave us democracy and culture, Sparta gave us soldiers and silence. The Spartan way of life was brutal, but to them, it was the only way to live with honor. They believed true freedom was earned only through obedience, training, and sacrifice. Everything in Sparta revolved around one purpose: preparing men for war and women for motherhood. From birth to death, Spartans lived under a strict system of discipline called the Boys were taken from their families at 7 and trained to become fearless warriors. Girls were raised to be strong, independent, and capable of birthing Spartan sons. Their society may seem cruel today, but to Spartans, it was the definition of glory. Even their slaves, the helots, were reminders of what happened to those who lost to Sparta. Spartan life was not about wealth, fame, or beauty. It was about honor through pain. They spoke little, acted quickly, and never feared death. Their entire existence was a preparation for battle, mind, body, and soul. Today, we dive into the chilling reality of ancient Sparta's laws, warriors, and silent deaths. This is not a story of kindness or culture, but of steel, sacrifice, and war. The Spartan legend lives on in films, myths, and games, but the truth is even darker. What does it mean to be born for war? What price must be paid for greatness? As we step into Sparta's blood-stained past, remember, weakness was never an option. This is the story of a society that turned children into killers and death into glory. A city where fear was beaten out and emotion was buried deep beneath bronze armor. So sharpen your mind like a Spartan blade. We're going into their world now. From birth to battle, and from glory to the grave. This is Ancient Sparta, unmasked. Let's begin at the very start. What made Sparta so terrifying, and why did it endure? Spartan life didn't begin in love, it began with judgment, inspection, and decision. Every newborn boy in Sparta faced a brutal test. Was he strong enough to survive? The elders of the city inspected the baby for any weakness or imperfection. If the child was deemed weak, he was thrown from Mount Targetus to die. This act wasn't cruelty, it was policy, designed to eliminate weakness at birth. Only the physically perfect were allowed to grow, train, and one day fight. Spartan babies were not cuddled, they were hardened from the very first cry. Mothers did not whisper lullabies, they taught their babies not to fear pain. By age 7, boys were taken from home and placed into military schools. This system was called the Agosian intense regime of survival and training. Boys learned how to fight, steal, endure hunger, and suffer without complaint. They were beaten regularly, not as punishment, but to toughen their spirit. They were given little food, forcing them to steal if caught. They were whipped. This trained them in stealth, speed, and silent Spartanness. There was no love in Agog, only hardship and the constant presence of death. Friendships were encouraged, even romantic bonds between older and younger boys. This wasn't for emotion, but to create loyalty on the battlefield. Boys slept on beds made of reeds and bathed in cold water all year long. Their clothes were minimal. Their comfort was irrelevant. Every lesson in the Agog had one goal: create fearless, loyal warriors. Even their voices were trained to be low and commanding, no softness allowed. At 15, if a boy survived the Agog, he was ready for real battle. At 20, he became a full Spartan soldier and joined the Brotherhood of Arms. But the hardest tests were yet to come for true Spartans. Death was not failure. It was the reward for living the way of the sword. While men trained for war, Spartan women trained for motherhood. It was no less brutal. Spartan girls were raised to be strong, loud, and fearless, not shy or delicate. They exercised, ran races, threw javelins, and wrestled in public. The logic was simpler: strong woman births strong Spartan sons. Women were expected to endure pain and hardship just like the men. They were educated, something rare in ancient times, and knew how to manage estates. While their husbands were at war, women ruled the home and controlled the economy. In Sparta, women had more freedom and respect than in any other Greek city. They owned land, made decisions, and spoke their minds without fear. A famous Spartan saying was, "Come back with your shielder on it." This wasn't just poetic, it was what mothers told their sons before battle. There was no crying for lost husbands or sons, only pride in their sacrifice. Women were trained to value death in battle more than life in shame. Marriage was arranged for reproduction, not romance. If a man couldn't produce children, another Spartan might be chosen to assist. This was not scandal, it was duty to the state. Love, loyalty, and passion were second to Sparta's survival. Even during childbirth, women were expected to die silently and bravely. They had no room for weakness. They were warriors of the womb. Their job was to birth the future of Sparta and bury its fallen heroes. The state owned their bodies, and their pride came from their children's glory. If a woman cried, she disgraced her entire bloodline. In this city of warriors, even the women carried the fire of steel. They didn't hold swords, but they forged those who did. Spartan women didn't bow, they raised kings. The Spartan army wasn't just feared, it was worshipped as the deadliest force in ancient Greece. From childhood, every Spartan male was molded into a living weapon. They trained in phalanx formation, tight, disciplined, and nearly impossible to break. Their shields were not just protection, they were symbols of unity and honor. Dropping your shield in battle was considered cowardice and punished with exile or death. Spartan warriors fought side by side, each one responsible for the man next to him. This trust and discipline made them nearly unbeatable in hand-to-hand combat. Their primary weapon was the dory, a long spear, combined with short swords for close combat. Their armor was minimal compared to other armies. They relied more on mobility, but their true weapon was mental toughness. Spartans feared nothing, not even death. They fought not for fame, but for Sparta, for glory, and for the brotherhood. Every battle was a test of their soul: either return victorious or be remembered with honor. The most elite among them were chosen to join the Cryptia, a secret death squad. These young men were sent into the night to kill helots silently, to sharpen their instincts. The Cryptia was not war, it was legalized murder in the name of training. It was Sparta's way of controlling their slave population through terror, and also a test: if you could kill without hesitation, you were ready for real war. Spartans didn't retreat, and surrender was worse than death. At the famous Battle of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans held off thousands of Persians. Though they died, they became immortal models of ultimate sacrifice. Their military drills were relentless: no rest, no mercy, no fear. They could march for days without food and fight without sleep. In the Spartan mind, pain was weakness leaving the body, and war was the greatest stage for proving your worth. To be a Spartan soldier meant one thing: be ready to die well. For all its pride and glory, Sparta was built on the backs of brutalized slaves. They were native peoples, conquered by Sparta and forced into lifelong servitude. Helots worked the land, produced food, and were treated with deep suspicion. Their lives were harsh, their freedoms non-existent, and their safety always at risk. Each year, Sparta declared war on the Helots so they could be killed legally. This ensured they stayed in constant fear, never rising up against their masters. Helots outnumbered Spartans by far, but discipline kept them chained. Spartans believed fear was the only way to maintain control over them. Forced to wear animal skins and get drunk to amuse Spartans, Helots were humiliated. They were a warning to others what happened to the weak and conquered. Despite this, Helots occasionally rebelled. Some uprisings were bloody and fierce, but most were crushed, with public executions and harsher controls. The system was unstable, built on terror, not trust. But it allowed Spartans to focus on war while others did the work. Without Helots, there would be no Spartan army, no leisure to train for battle. It's one of Sparta's darkest truths: they preached honor, but lived by domination. Helots could never earn freedom through service, they were born to be broken. The contrast between Spartan pride and Helot suffering is striking. Freedom for the few, slavery for the many, that was the Spartan way. Even children were taught to mock and hurt Helots as part of growing up. This dehumanization kept the machine running, generation after generation. And while history remembers the 300 Spartans, it forgets the thousands of Helots. Their story is one of silence, pain, and a system built to erase them. In Sparta, discipline meant more than self-control. It meant absolute control over others, and rigid, a perfect city of warriors built on blood and shadows. Daily life in Sparta wasn't filled with music, art, or debate. It was plain, tough, trained hard, ate little, and spoke less. Spartans woke early. Food was basic, most famously the dreaded black broth made of pig blood and vinegar. Luxury was banned. Spartan Homes were simple, clothing plain, and wealth discouraged. Gold and silver coins were outlawed. They used heavy iron to discourage trade. Conversation was brief, and direct. Spartans believed in action, not chatter. They trained, patrolled, and maintained peak condition until old age. Even old men were expected to stay fit and advise younger warriors. Marriage ceremonies were strange. Brides had their heads shaved and wore men's clothes. After marriage, husbands often lived in barracks until they were 30. Spartans didn't live with family until their full military service was complete. Love life was secondary, duty came first. Children were taught obedience and silence from the moment they could walk. Schooling was focused on toughness, tactics, and loyalty, not reading or writing. Entertainment was rare. Spartans found joy in training and victory. Festivals were about state pride and hero worship, not fun or escape. There were few poets or artists. Those who existed wrote about war and honor. Music did exist, but mostly in the form of marching songs and battle hymns. Religious life focused on warrior gods like Ares and Apollo. Civic duty was sacred. Disobedience was a stain on your name forever. Spartans were allowed only one identity: soldier or mother. Every day reinforced their one mission: serve Sparta until death. Even meals were eaten in groups, in silence, like rituals of unity. No private property, no gossip, no emotion, just structure and sacrifice. This was how a Spartan lived, not for comfort, but for the cause. Discipline in Sparta was more than strict. It was sacred, brutal, and unavoidable. Every Spartan was watched by others. Loyalty was tested every day. Disobedience was punished with whipping, exile, or even death, no matter your age. Even children were beaten regularly to build pain tolerance and obedience. Public humiliation was common. Cowards were forced to wear cloaks with holes. These men became social outcasts, ignored even by their own families. In Sparta, fear of shame was often worse than fear of injury. There was no privacy. Your life belonged to the state, from birth to death. If you cried during pain, you were mocked and shamed in front of all. A famous story tells of a Spartan boy hiding a fox under his cloak. It bit into his stomach, but he stayed silent and died without complaint. This was praised, not mourned. It was seen as the height of Spartan courage. Lying was a crime, and laziness a disease to be eradicated. Every Spartan was taught to walk straight, talk sharp, and never hesitate. Even laughter was limited. Joy was not for warriors but for poets and fools. Soldiers were expected to endure winter without shoes, heat without shade. There were no excuses, no sympathy, no mercy even from family. If a man disobeyed orders in battle, he was exiled or executed publicly. Even kings could be punished or removed if they violated Spartan law. The system ruled all above emotion, bloodline, or personal desire. This intense control forged warriors but crushed individuality. You were not the person, you were a unit of Sparta's war machine. Many Spartans didn't live long, but those who did were shaped by fire. The few who survived this system became legends of strength and will. In Sparta, to live without discipline was worse than to die with honor. Death was not feared. In Sparta it was accepted, even welcomed, with pride. A Spartan's greatest wish was to die in battle, facing the enemy head-on. If you died courageously, your name would be remembered forever. Cowards, on the other hand, were forgotten. No grave, no ceremony, no song. Only two kinds of people received marked graves: warriors who died in battle and women who died in childbirth. These were considered equal sacrifices for the state's survival. Death at home from illness or accident was considered dishonorable. Even funerals were silent. No weeping, no dramatic speeches, only respect. Spartans didn't fear death. They trained for it from childhood. In fact, it was seen as the moment you proved your entire life's worth. There were no golden tombs or lavish monuments, just a name and legacy. Before battles, warriors combed their hair and prepared to die well. They believed the gods honored those who fought bravely and died clean. Fleeing from battle was the ultimate disgrace, worse than death itself. Returning without your shield meant you had thrown it down to run. This was considered treason and often punished by exile or execution. Even women, when receiving news of a son's death, were expected to smile. Their pride came from knowing their sons had died as Spartans. There was no room for mourning in public, only quiet strength. Songs were written for the fallen, but they praised valor, not sorrow. Legends say fallen Spartans were seen in dreams by their brothers, guiding them. The afterlife was not discussed. To a Spartan, Death was not the end, but the final act of honor. As the saying goes, either with your shield or on it. No, third option. In this way, Sparta made even death a tool of its discipline and glory. Sparta's rise was swift, but its fall was inevitable and brutal. For centuries, their warriors dominated Greece with fear and steel. But after their peak at the Battle of Thermopylae, cracks began to form. The Peloponnesian War drained Sparta's strength, and their enemies adapted. Their brutal treatment of the Helots created rebellion and unrest within. Even their own allies began to question their cold, rigid society. Spartans refused to change, refused to evolve with the rest of Greece. While other cities grew through trade and ideas, Sparta stayed isolated. Wealth and power began to corrupt even the most disciplined Spartans. They became fewer in number and able to maintain the same warrior system. By the time Rome rose, Sparta was no longer feared, it was a shadow. Once, kings trembled before Spartan soldiers, now they were entertainers. The very discipline that made them great also made them unable to adapt. Change was seen as weakness, and tradition became a prison. Eventually, Sparta lost its independence and became a tourist memory. Roman emperors visited the ruins of their once great training fields. The agoge was no more, the sword was laid to rest. Their fierce code of silence could no longer silence history's judgment. Sparta didn't die in battle, it faded slowly under its own weight. But its legend survived, twisted by poets and warriors alike. Even today, the word Spartan means strength, discipline, and sacrifice. Their fall is a lesson. Strength without compassion cannot last forever. A society built only for war is destined to break in peace. And though the warriors are gone, their shadows still march in our memory. Sparta was not just a city, it was an idea. And like all ideas, it lives long after the blood is dried. Sparta is remembered as the land of perfect warriors, but the truth is far more complex. Modern films and books romanticize Spartans' strength, but often ignore their cruelty. They were brave, yes, but they were also brutal, controlling, and deeply unequal. We admire their courage, but forget the oppression of helots and the silence of fear. Their society crushed weakness, but also crushed art, emotion, and freedom. In the name of discipline, they erased compassion and creativity. Yet their story survives because we crave the myth of ultimate strength. We want to believe in people who never break, never cry, never retreat. But real life is not. So simple. Sparta paid a heavy price for its perfection. Their warriors were mighty, but few lived long enough to enjoy peace. They gave up love, comfort, and identity to serve a system that eventually collapsed. Today, the word Spartan symbolizes simplicity, toughness, and endurance. Athletes, soldiers, and leaders still quote Spartan values for motivation. But true understanding requires more than admiration, it demands honesty. Can a society truly thrive without mercy, without beauty, without change? Sparta teaches us about the power of will, but also about its limits. Strength alone cannot build a lasting world. It must be paired with wisdom. We must remember the helots, the women, the silent suffering behind the steel. For every glorious battle, there were hidden tears, broken dreams, and lost lives. Still, their discipline inspires proof that the human spirit can endure anything. But we must not repeat their mistakes. Cold perfection breeds cold decay. History remembers Sparta not for its joy, but for its sacrifice. It stands as both a beacon of bravery and a warning of extremism. In the end, Sparta wasn't just a city, it was a mirror, showing us what we become when we choose strength over soul. And in that reflection, we must choose what kind of world we wish to build.